Mike, nice to see you again. We've just had a little cup of tea and a bit of a break. And in the time that we were doing that, we started talking about Buddhism and about desire and about religious desire and want. And we, just towards the end of our conversation, before I interrupted you, you started to talk about how interesting it was looking at old people in terms of their wants. Just tell us a bit about that.
Yes, well, I've observed this twice with members of my family. I had some grandparents who'd lived together for a good 60, 70 years. I didn't know them very well, my mother's parents. They were Polish Jews, and my grandmother never really spoke good English, and they'd lived together, and she'd produced 10 children and about 3 miscarriages. And my mother was the baby of that family, and said, I only remember my mother as an old woman, you know. And
your grandmother is an old woman. You only remember your
yes, my mother could only see her mother as an old woman, yes. And they lived together in quite poor circumstances, and they were finally living in one room in their old age, with an enormous bed in it and a heater and a cooker, some sort of cooker, and not much else. And their children sort of helped to pay for the rent, whatever it is. And they didn't get on very well, I think. Now, my grandfather died, and almost immediately afterwards, my grandmother died. Because for whatever reason, he was her life. And she needed him, or she wanted something, or he was an expression of her existence. And when he died, she had no more purpose, and she literally shrank and died. And I remember going to see her in hospital. They just said, oh, she's old. But she shrunk into this little shriveled thing because she'd just given up any need. She'd stopped wanting anything, and therefore all the mechanism within her had sort of died down. Now, with my mother was the baby of a family, and her next sister, she had this love-hate relationship all their lives. And they were a comedy act because, you just watched them and they never changed. Now, my aunt was rather dreamy and feckless, and, and she became a Baha'i in later life. I don't know. And she sort of had affairs with inappropriate people. She never got married. And my mother became a very good sort of designer. She made hats. She was in the fashion business when people wore hats. And her sister sort of copied her in a very minor way. And somehow my mother, though she was the youngest one and had a lot of drive, felt she always had to take care of her sister. My mother emigrated to America because life wasn't being very good for her in London in the sort of 50s, a woman alone, because she divorced my father. And she got married out there, and she said, I'm going to try to bring Mitzi out here. Maybe she'll find a husband and have a better life. So she persuaded Mitzi to leave London, which Mitzi didn't really want to do. And Mitzi came to Los Angeles and carried on in exactly the same way. And, and my mother sort of basically looked after her from then on. And Mitzi, then my mother had a stroke, very bad one. And for about, God, how many years? 70, 83, about 13 years, she couldn't talk, read, write, understand, move, was in a care home. And my aunt used to sort of feel that my mother needed her, and she used to bring her food, which she didn't really want, and sort of come to her. And every time my aunt arrived, my mother would go and make noises like, I don't want you here, you see. And my aunt would say, oh, she's so terrible to me, but she needs me, you see. And this went on. Then my mother died. And very soon after that, my aunt died. And her purpose in life, slim and as unreciprocated as it was, had gone. And I think that's not unreasonable. So what I'm saying, basically, if you don't have objectives, you can't live. And if you're trying to create living people on stage, they have to have purposes or lives or needs which they are pursuing.
Yeah. The other thing that I talked to you, Mike, sort of off camera, as it were, was something that I used to do with students, which was, I think it was an exercise from Keith Johnson. I think it was Keith Johnson, which was put in the passive tense, as it were. So somebody we'd have a party or something, and somebody would want to be admired. Somebody would want to be thought of as intellectual. Somebody would want to thought of as being the life and soul of the party, I remember. There was a lovely one, which was quite interesting to play. I want to be thought of as normal. And I often used to think about you, because I always saw this as a sort of, a kind of passive thing. But in our conversation, you said, no, that's real life.
Look, if I want to be seen as something, I've got to make sure that, be seen by who? If I want to be seen, it implies I want to be seen or thought of by other people. So immediately I am creating myself in a certain way to elicit that response from them. Mm-hmm. So it is absolutely not passive. An objective cannot be passive, although you've got that passive. You see, I want to be seen as. I want you to see me as a very wise person, a clever person, a mysterious person, whatever it is. As I say, there's a very funny character in Evelyn Waugh's novel, A Handful of Dust. Her name is, she's English, sort of cafe society, and she's called Jenny Abdul Akbar, and she married some sort of North Moroccan potentate, whether it's true or not. And so she dramatizes her life. When I lived with the Mahdi, I have such scars that nobody can see. So she performs to make herself interesting. And it's very, very funny and very sad. And I want to be seen to be mysterious and suffering and rather special, you see. And we all do it to a certain degree. We all put on performances in order for people to respond to us in a particular way. That's how we function. So
I'm going to put a marker down, and I don't know whether we want to talk about this right now, but quite often you have linked the word funny with the word sad. You did it with Olga, and you've just done it with this character.
It's because they're real people. The writers are great writers, and they don't write two-dimensional characters. And so from one side of Olga, and this is very Chekhovian, he shows us somebody who is really seriously unhappy with her life. She's genuinely suffering. But the means by which she goes about trying to alleviate it are ridiculous, funny, stupid, inappropriate. Because if you go around saying, oh, I'm so tired, I've got such a headache. Oh, God, I'm tired. After a while, people are going to take an aspirin, they're not, and so she doesn't solve her problem. And you see, this is the foolishness and sadness of people, and that's what Chekhov's writing about all the time, that we live unhappily because we don't try to solve our problems properly.
I was going to say, did you ever speculate as to what Olga could have done in order to get herself the attention and the sympathy and the love that she required?
She would have to be a very different character.
Hmm.
She'd have to be somebody else. Bernard Shaw wrote a wonderful review. I think it was Sir, whatever his name, Max Beerbohm Tree. No, not Max, but somebody, Henry Beerbohm Tree, whatever his name, Edwardian actor, said, played Falstaff last night, and he has everything for that character except being in the right body. You know, he used to be a totally different person. You know, and absolutely nothing going for him. You know, so now I suppose through life, if our life is part of our need in life is to understand ourselves, to improve, to be open to change, to tolerate judging ourselves, then we can improve our character, shall we say, or be more successful in getting what we want, or suddenly realizing that what we want is inappropriate. Because, do you see what I mean? So this is the complexity of how one lives, isn't it, really?
Mm. Okay, but now just to go back, I'm obsessing about Olga now. Does she change in the course of the play, or is she still wanting the same thing?
Well, it's a little ambiguous at the end. She says, "Oh, isn't the music wonderful? It makes you want to live." And at her very last line, it's the last line of the play, "If only we knew, if only we knew." So I don't think so. She may have reached an area of acceptance, because everything, the family is splitting up, it's gone. She's teaching, she is a headmistress, she's living at the school now, she's committed to living. She does have another objective which will keep her going, which is to do her duty.
Mm.
And so she will do her duty as a teacher.
Mm.
And that will, but it's not fulfilling her.
No.
She doesn't make herself lovable, shall we say, in the broader sense of the word.
Yeah. When we decided we were going to talk about objectives, you said that you had an example. Maybe the Olga one was the example, but you said you had a very clear example of two characters wanting something.
Yes, okay. Let's talk about Streetcar. Streetcar, because it's, I guess, certainly actors should know or know about it. Okay, so very briefly, there are two main characters. There's one character called Blanche Dubois, who is from a southern sort of antebellum society in the South, brought up with a lot of airs and graces, to be refined, to be considerate, to study art and beauty, you know, to lead a beautiful life with taste, and to be, you know, to be socially charming and gracious. Yeah. And for various reasons, her family collapses, the family home goes into disrepair, and she is totally alone in the world, you know, abandoned. She has no money. She did spend time as a school mistress, but she had sex with a student and she was kicked out. And so we feel sex has been a surrogate sort of need for her to keep her going. And you get the impression that she's put herself about a bit to have sex with whoever's around, a little bit. And she finally has to move out of this stately home, and she's abandoned. Now she's got a younger sister who's taken a totally different track in life, who's left that home, has gone out into real life, is now living in New Orleans, and is married to a guy called Stanley Kowalski, who's Polish, or of Polish extraction, who was in the war, who I think works in a factory or something like that, who's a real man's man, you know, very macho, who plays bowls, who plays, has a card game, poker game with all his mates, who's very sexually driven and is not at all refined. Now, Blanche runs to her sister, Stella, because that's the only place to go. She doesn't tell her she's coming. And Stella is put into predicament because she doesn't particularly get on with Blanche, but she feels an obligation. So Blanche moves in to Stella's apartment, which is in a very seedy part of New Orleans, and moves in with her and Stanley. Now, Stanley immediately senses an intruder in his space. Mm. So he doesn't take kindly to her airs and graces. She sort of performs, this lovely, charming, gracious Southern belle, and he doesn't buy it. And he also senses that she's stolen all the family money, and why didn't some of it come to Stella? So he keeps interrogating and trying to find out what she's up to, and trying to find out how long she's staying, and to let her know he doesn't really want her there. Now, Stella is desperate, and she has no way of turning. So she needs to cling to her sister. So slowly through the play, she tries to put her sister against her husband, Stella against Stanley, her husband. He's so coarse, he's so vulgar. I don't know how you can live with him. And so Stella becomes the center of a conflict between Stanley and Stella. Blanche's objective is to find a place where she can be safe and belong. Stanley's is to control his domain and that is the essential conflict of the play, and it develops through it. And it's quite simple, really. Mm. It's very wittily done, has variation. And
why do you say ancient?
Did I say no?
Oh, sorry. Very, very wittily done. Very. Sorry, I misheard you.
What I meant was sort of imaginative, creative. I mean, he finds lots of, he digs quite deep, and they all play lots of different games in order to get what they want. And he ends up raping her, and she ends up going mad, basically. And so he wins and she loses. Mind you, at the end, we wonder how much Stanley has won because he's alienated his wife. Mm. Mm. And I think the last line of the play is him screaming. She's gone upstairs to a neighbor, and he's standing on the steps of the house yelling, "Stella, Stella." I don't know. So it's, but it's a very clear conflict, and it's a very profound conflict, which is exactly the same conflict that we have in Three Sisters. It's about the objective of people brought up in the past, shall we say, trying to maintain and sustain their standards in a changing world. And the past is always seen as being kinder, more gracious, genteel, polite, educated, and the present is always more seen as more coarse. And, so you can see it in governments now, and so forth and so on, and the Three Sisters is exactly about that. It's about the Three Sisters, the general's daughters, and they end up marooned in this provincial city, Perm possibly, feeling totally out of their element with a populace, with a citizenship which doesn't aspire to the arts, who are coarse and crude, and they feel they don't belong there, and they criticize this world. And the conflict is that a person from this world, Natasha, marries their brother and moves into their house, and she's a coarse, primitive, pretty bourgeois, ambitious person. And she moves into the house and moves them out of it during 3.5 years and 4 acts.
Mm.
So it's the same conflict, Stanley pushing Blanche out. And the interesting thing is, in both cases, Stanley has a child, Natasha has two children, Blanche is childless, and so are the 3 sisters. So you're presented with a real challenging conflict. Who do you side with? The people we find as being inactive and gracious don't do anything, don't achieve anything, except be very judgmental. And the people who are crude and coarse get on with life and produce stuff. So, and I have a feeling it probably lurks under a lot of plays that, those are the, you see, so those are the big objectives. And they break down into detailed behavior patterns as the characters come in conflict with different people. So the sisters are unbearably rude to Natasha. They talk about her behind her back. They criticize what she's wearing. They laugh at her. They ignore her, And she desperately tries to ingratiate herself with them and sort of sucks up to them and flatters them to start with and praises them and sort of coaxes them and slowly gets what way. And when she's and finally, the Act 3, there's a conflict in which suddenly everything explodes and she just becomes very aggressive and shows her true colors. And because she's strong, she totally wipes the floor with Olga. So you see all the time I was talking, people are doing things to get what they want.
Yeah.
And they're often doing the wrong thing and suffer from their mistakes. Yeah. If the 3 sisters had the ability to incorporate Natasha, to try to meet her on some way, who knows why, but they couldn't, they can't. She offends their sensibilities. Blanche is offended by Stanley. She tries to use all her flirtatious things. She says, I don't buy all that shit, to her. Anyway, so.
Okay, Mike, I think we've got one more talk, and I think we'll do it as a separate one, because what I think we might want to talk about in a separate little thing is how you as a director coax this work out of an actor.
Yes, I would like to do that because we've talked in theory about it and I've given experiences, examples, but actually technically, how does one go about it?
Yeah.
Because some of those objectives are too big to be played.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to bring this one to a close and we're going to reconvene and talk about objectives in action, as it were.
Yes, absolutely. And you could entitle it The Hierarchy of Actions, of Objectives, if you want. Okay?
All right. Talk in a second.
Thank you for watching. And I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.